board, and then I'm going to share this interview between Daniel and Melissa. I will in just a second. Let's try this again. Do a new screen share. Zoom does not want to let me share the video, but it did before, so I know it's going to do it again. Give me 1 second. Sorry, you guys.
Thank you so much for agreeing to have this conversation with me today. I really think that we are going to elevate what our attendees know and believe conversation.
You guys can't see it, can you?
No.
Damn it. All right. See. Here we go. All right. Better late than never.
To be through this conversation that we're having. So thank you for that. And I'm just going to jump right in with my first question, which is...
And by the way, do we drink every time we say conversation? That's...
Yes.
Right.
Yes, let's. All of you out there, grab your beverage of choice. All right. So can you give us a brief explanation of what it means to design a conversation and why is that important for meeting planners?
Wow. That's so first of all, I think we just have to start with the idea of, do conversations matter, and what type of conversations are we trying to cultivate in our events, in our meetings, in our organizations? I personally feel like our lives are generally lived one conversation at a time. I don't know who said the conversations are the smallest unit of change. That's certainly true in an organizational and a human and personal development sense, but the conversations that exist between our teams and our products, between our brands and our customers, like, they're all really, really critical. So I think I just see conversations everywhere around us. And so I think in terms of design to me just means to do things well on purpose. So if we talk about designing things, making things good by accident, that's great. Doing things bad on purpose is terrible. And you can usually get away with the first, doing things well by accident, but for only a short period of time. And so eventually you have to learn how to do things well on purpose. And that is design. And we are all designers of something. And so to me, I think using the language of design is where I came from. I came from product design and product innovation. And everyone designs something, and they need to understand the materials of the thing they're designing. In industrial design school, they taught us that designing for steel or paper is different. You can't make the same thing out of the same material. And so if conversation is a material we're all working with, by golly, shouldn't we understand how it's built so that we can design for it and with it better? I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. And to that point, so we need to really think about how we're designing differently for again, as meeting planners for our board of directors meeting versus our large scale convention.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so the question is, what are we designing for? Martin Buber, who was a Jewish philosopher, said that all real living is meeting, like truly connecting with someone else. And if that's what we're designing for, how do we design it? I think, I don't know if this is jumping the gun, but I feel like there was, sometimes people have this thing of like, oh, we have this all hands meeting and we want to get a whole bunch of people together to just hear what one person has to say. And a lot of organizational designers I talk to say like, this is, I mean, certainly boring for a lot of people. Now, you can go talk to a speaker's coach and they will tell you how to deliver a really engaging talk. It can be done, right? The question is, are we trying to do a one-to-many conversation, or are we trying to design a many-to-many conversation? And in a great conference, in a great event, I've certainly coached some event and meeting planners that have to have this whole spectrum of, one to many and many to many and someplace in the middle conversations. And so to me, I think you got to look at the spectrum of conversations and ask yourself, which are we actually trying to cultivate? Which do we want? And do we want a range, or do we want to just make the one that we've got, this one type that we've got, the best it can be? Based on the technology we have, based on the types of people that are showing up, what type of conversation are we actually trying to cultivate? And
so
host?
when you're talking about the conversation, then does that also include conversations from speakers that are on the stage to attendees?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So one organization that I was coaching, they thought really carefully about designing these smaller, more intimate dialogues where speaker salons, right?
Okay.
Right. So how will we make sure that the speakers can have some smaller conversations with some people inside of the conference? This was like a 6,000 person conference, so everyone can't have that opportunity. I've also been at conferences where they try to get all the speakers together the night before to have a conversation. Why did they do that? Right? Like, what's the goal? Well, they wanted to make sure that we all felt like a community. They wanted us to have a many-to-many conversation before we had our one-to-many conversations, so that it felt like a place, it felt like a space, it felt like a thing that we had arrived at. So I mean, a great event is just this arc of conversations. It's not just turning on a light switch and saying, okay, we've got 5 presenters and they're talking, right? There's a lot of conversations that happen behind the stage, and there's to even make it as you know, right? Many conversations we've had before we hit roll on this.
Exactly. But so you have to get the buy-in from everybody on your team and the speakers and the participants to an extent. How do you get the buy-in from the participants?
Yeah. Well, that's so the essence of that is invitation, right? Is by asking. And so what you're asking for, by the way, is just like a really great design question, which is classic. It's like, here's the conversation we want to have, but then how do we get into it? And then what happens after it? How do we entice people to enter into it, and how will they exit the conversation, and then how do we extend the experience of that conversation? Right? If we're not just saying like, okay, here it's this one thing. We can zoom out, take a wide lens. This is part of the 5 E's of experience design. This is a classic model of entice, enter, engage. Right? We want to have deep engagement in this moment, in this conversation, but we also want to make sure that the window of engagement is extended way out. Right? I assume that after this conference, you're going to be sending people recordings and sending people emails. Each one of those emails is like a little mini conversation. Each of those emails is going to have a subject line and a headline and a first paragraph of text that is going to try and get people to be enticed to enter, to engage.
So
with
that's
the content
fascinating.
over and over. So it's like, to me, it's just a cycle of conversations over and over and over again.
So that's fascinating, because I don't know how many people actually think about the fact that from the moment a potential attendee finds your business, your event or whatnot, that you're starting those conversations even with
Yes.
what's on your website, right? And what's on your
It's called to
email
action.
threads.
Yeah, that subject line in your email is the call to hopefully to begin a conversation. Now, I think not all conversations are deep, not all conversations are long, right? There's nothing wrong with talking to the person who manages the door of your building and saying, "Morning, how's it going? Good to see you. Great day. Good luck out there. High five." Right? Like, not everyone, but this is, of course, like this quote unquote cultural difference. Sometimes people talk about how in Europe, people are like, Americans just like, they say, "How you doing?" and they don't really mean it. They don't want to know.
Right. Right.
But they have small talk in Europe. And so you have to ask yourself, is this a small talk or is this a big talk? Is this a long conversation or is this a short conversation? What do I want? And we've all had that experience, or at least I have, of like being on a first date and feeling like it's slipping away, and you're like, am I going to get the second date? Right? With your client, you're like, or potential client, you're like, I want this sales conversation to close. I have an opener and I have a closer, and I'd like to convert them. So these are just dialogues that we're designing as best we can.
Sure. What about, how do we help our attendees? So we've had conversations with our speakers. They're ready to have conversations with the participants. The participants are there. How do we help facilitate conversations among participants? You know, in a traditional event, there's hallway conversations that just happen organically. You walk out of a session together and you're chit-chatting about what you just learned or heard. But in this virtual world, it's a little bit different. And with this Age of Conversation event, we're trying really hard to facilitate that. But what else can we be doing?
It's hard. It's authentically hard. And one of the reasons for that is the interfaces that the conversations are in. Like, physical space is a place that we've had 40,000 years to wander around in. We can move freely in 3 dimensions. We have that ability. It's very hard to do that in a digital space, depending on what tools you're using, right? And so you really need to find a platform that allows that. And physical space allows that. A hallway means you can move in 3 dimensions freely. You can see somebody and you can go and talk to them. We don't have very many good digital platforms that allow that. People are working on them, and I think the selection of a good platform is one way to do it. The other is to host, as we talked earlier, to host some smaller conversations. Right. So this one particular client that I'm thinking of, they actually had some conversations, just Zoom rooms that up to 50 people could be in. You could just pop in and pop out. That was the hallway. It's not the same.
Doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So like that's table stakes. The next step is, because we rarely sit in a circle of 50 people and have a real conversation, then we have to get into the question of like, what makes good conversation dynamics? When you're at a party, 1 or 2 or 3 people can have a conversation. When 4 or 5 people get there, things get a little awkward, right? One person can either dominate, or the conversation naturally wants to split off, because conversations get very complex with size. And so when you've got a party and you see a circle, you know, back in the day, if you can remember back to parties, Melissa.
So
I know,
long
parties,
ago.
right? But when you would see a group of 10 people in a circle, you would know that there was somebody who was very charismatic, or they had to know each other really well. And so when you're trying to get 50 people into a Zoom room to have a hallway conversation, that is not the way we've experienced it. So you need to design the dialogue. There's a lot of ways to do it, and I'm sure you know many of them. Table topics, like, let's make sure that everybody in the room like wants to talk about one specific thing. So this room is for talking about topic A, and this is for talking about topic B. And if you'd like to talk about topic C, you can start a room. And if you're in topic B room and you're talking about topic A, who's going to do something about it? Whose job is it to take care of the conversation? Who's looking after it? Who's stewarding it? Who's facilitating? Who's designing the dialogue? Is there somebody in the room to say, hey, Melissa, I'm so glad you want to talk about topic B, but this is a topic A room, so please GTFO. Right? That's so like we have to design that experience. What happens when somebody screws up? What happens when somebody messes up? We have to anticipate that. So there has to be a facilitator in the room, and you have to train those people. You have to give them a set of guidelines to manage that dialogue. You have to give them the ability, the power to do something about it. It's you can't just say, oh, let's open up the hallway. The hallway works because I assume there's still a security guard in a real conference, you know, that if one of the speakers is literally being harassed by somebody, you can be like, I'm going to call security. Like this person won't get out of my face. There's an attendant, right? There's still rules of conduct. And so even more so, I think emceeing, like you need to have an MC. Emceeing energy is so important in these Wild West rooms. 50 people on a Zoom call, like it's chaotic. We don't know how to act. Everybody unmuted, like anybody talking anytime they want. Turn taking is one of the hardest, most important things to regulate in these kinds of hallway conversations. We can't have them exactly the same way we wanted to. And so like we have to design our way around it. Like there's a platform called Hopin that has a networking room where you just will randomly paired up with one person. It's like chat roulette.
Oh, speed dating.
It's speed dating. Yeah. And this is something that like has been done in in-person conferences, but smaller conversations are much easier to manage and to monitor and to participate in. You don't need that MC. And so when you think about that spectrum of conversations, do I want to get 50 people in a room? Right. Yes. If so, I want to get that buzz, then I have to have an MC. Right? You just can't. And if I want to have an MC, then the question is how general or how specific is that room? So maybe it's just the way I'm built, but I just think on spectrums. So how big is the conversation? How specific is the invitation? And these are all elements in the conversation operating system, which I talk about in my recent book, Good Talk.
In your book.
How to Design Conversations That Matter. When I talk about understanding the material of conversation, this is what I'm talking about. Like, it's made of people. Should all the people be the same or should they all be different? Like, how big is the group of people? How small is it going to be? It changes the conversation. How specific is the topic? How general is the topic? How controlled or uncontrolled? Who has power? Like, if that moderator has the ability to kick people out, they have real power. Otherwise, they just have recommendation power, right? I think you might want to go into another room. I can't actually kick you out. But that's a lot of power. Why should I have that power? Who does have that power?
But in those situations, does there always need to be a definitive end result? Or can the end result simply be sharing of ideas?
It can be. It's funny. My mom likes to joke that she's like, Daniel, I don't always want to be designing my conversations. And I say that's a design choice. So undesigning them, softly designing them, gently designing them is still a design choice. And saying we're not going to come to a conclusion in this dialogue is a big thing that I do in my facilitation practice. If you're working with a group of people, sometimes the goal is we have to come to a conclusion, one thing we're going to do. But in an event, it's okay. We're just having, if it's about exchange of ideas, is it about making a friend? Is it about leaving with one insight? You have to know what you want people to exit with, right? And you have to find a way to deliver on that. And there's
so many options. There's so many things that people
choices
might want to end with. Yeah.
Well, and this is why you have to. So we talk about some of the elements of designing experiences. People, place, and purpose are three things you definitely have to know very, very clearly. You have to know who's coming. You have to know your purpose, and you have to know their purpose. And
so let's dive into that, actually. So you have your model for meeting design with your 9P model, and I know
yes.
people, purpose, and process are the first three. So let's
I could probably make it 10 or 7 or 12. 9 just fits into a grid nicely. All models are wrong. Some models are useful. It's actually based on, and I discovered it after I had 5 Ps. I discovered a model that was 7 Ps from the book Game Storming, which is a wonderful book about process design. The 9 Ps, the 3 that I think everyone should just know down pat is who are the people who are showing up. Do I have a very, very clear image in my mind of what their goals are, right? What their needs are, what their capacities are. Yesterday I run a facilitation masterclass every month or so, and this woman said, well, how do I know if this group can use this digital whiteboarding tool that's very popular? I said, you have to find out. You have to either ask them or try it with them and find out if they freak out or not. Like, is your group of people technically proficient, and or do they have a growth mindset? If they are neither technically proficient nor do they have a growth mindset, then you should probably use something that they are really, really familiar with, right? You should go to a place that feels familiar to them. And this is why people still use Zoom so much. Like, Zoom just kind of works. If you go to a new place for the conversation and something goes wrong with it, people will blame you, right? They're like, oh, Melissa and her team use this crazy, weird, like, new tool, and this happened to me. I tried using a tool, and people were like, that was kind of awkward. And I'm like, yeah, what did you learn by using it? But people kind of like, they like what they're used to. And so you have to know, like, what places and spaces will support the conversation that you want to have.
So for planners, is it enough to know your boss comes to you and says, we need to have a product launch meeting? Is that all that they really need to know? That people are coming to learn about a product? Or do they need to dig deeper into the motivations of the individual people as to why they might be there?
I think the clearer your image of this person and their lived experience, the better off you're going to be. And the reason for that is, when you get to one of the other P's, which is process, like, what is the step-by-step of how this is going to happen? I do what I would call an empathic walkthrough. Like, I literally just try to, like, put on the eyes and ears of the persons in the experience, and I just, like, walk through it step by step. And I'm sure you've done this before. You're like, I think there's a gap there. Will they know how to go to step 3 from step 2? Like, I think there actually needs to be a step 2A, B, and C. And the rabbit hole can go pretty deep on process. But the only way you know how much detail is enough is if you can empathically put on the mindset of the persons that you are designing for. And that doesn't come for free. It's really lucky when you're designing for people who are like you. Designing for diverse people then asks the question, when and how should I bring people into this space? Am I designing an event in a vacuum because my boss told me to? And here's the design boss. Like, will the people like it? I don't know. Like, I'm just using best practices. That's just, it's a guess, it's a bet, right? And with events, it's hard because it's kind of, you don't really get a do-over.
Right.
Right. In product design and product innovation, like, you can iterate and test and try, and isn't that great? When you're talking about an event or an experience, you want it to be right. But that doesn't mean you can't prototype it. And that goes into design process. That's, of course, you should prototype your event in all sorts of different ways.
And just kind of play with it and see where you land.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that's, no. When I say prototype, a prototype is an experiment, right? So when you make an agenda is a prototype of how I think this meeting is going to run. I can use that agenda just for myself to read through and do an empathic walkthrough. Like, that's like the lowest level of clarity and fidelity. I can show it to someone else who isn't me, isn't my boss, and isn't the end customer. I can show it to somebody who is the end customer. What you show to people has to be designed. Like, you can't just show them an agenda and say, would you like to be at this meeting? Right? They can't necessarily respond to that. So you have to show them something that they can relate to or they'll get. And so that's just an iterative testing process. So I wouldn't say it's a guess. I would say, like, it's about intentionality. So we're talking about the spectrum of conversations. One client I was working with for a large event, they made a flyer of these different conversational areas, conversational opportunities that people would have at the conference, and they did share it with a small group of customers to get some feedback on that. Right? They did send it out in an email, and they measured, like, were people opening it? Were people downloading it? Like, right. So you're sort of iterating and testing and trying to try and find what we in the product world call product market fit. Right.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. That's
Absolutely. That's what I meant. But you do. I mean, the thing is, again, as planners, sometimes our process is very tunnel, right? Sometimes you're planning for a board of directors meeting and exactly every single person that's going to be in the room, why they're there. There's no real deeper understanding that you can get. You're there. But when we're planning these huge meetings, sometimes you just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to iterate your way there. And I think, and just something that's coming to mind, just to go back to an earlier point we made, at all of these meetings, I think the more we can design for real many-to-many conversations, the better. And I hear this when I design offsites. I think one of the reasons why people sometimes bring me in is they're like, well, we've got this thing where, like, a lot of people show a lot of slides, right? And somehow we're not getting what we want out of the meeting. Like, people don't feel engaged and we're not getting to good stuff. It's like, well, because there's these very old default patterns that we're in. One-to-many is so easy.
Right.
Just having a bunch of speakers and a bunch of panels is easy. It's actually much harder to train a speaker to be engaging. Not every speaker can run a little workshop. Not every speaker can host like a round table, right? Which is what made this one particular conference I'm thinking of and drawing a lot of my examples from very amazing, because they hired a speakers trainer to train all of the speakers to be really good at digital delivery and also to host some of these smaller conversations. This stuff doesn't come for free.
Right. I do think there's a difference between presenting and facilitating.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a spectrum, right? So, like, being able to, like, say, like, here's my 12 slides about my big ideas, right? But that the best speakers say, like, hey, who's ever blanked? And people raise their hands. Right. And actually, Esther Perel, I've seen her do this, where she has people stand up if they've had a particular experience. And she says, sit down if this. And she winds up with, like, 4 or 5 people in a room of 1,000. And she has a conversation with those 3 people. And everyone else is electrified. Now, is that speaking or is that facilitating?
I think it's more toward facilitating personally, but
but it makes her a great speaker.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. So in terms of the event that she is designing, she has a very, very clear vision in her mind of the type of experience she would like people to have and the types and level and depth of engagement she wants to achieve. And she's doing what she can to get there. Right? Whereas other people, and this is not a ding against somebody, because I've been to talks where literally somebody talks with no slides for an hour and I'm mesmerized. That's storytelling. That is just raw, and that is hard to do. Right? It is actually much easier to say, turn to your partner and share an idea of blank. I was at a conference last year where I realized everyone was doing that, and you know what, Melissa? It got boring.
Yeah.
Every speaker did it. And so that speaks to conversation design. Like, we actually need to make sure that we're designing a variety of interaction modes so that it's an interesting experience. We can't just have everyone being like, turn to a partner and talk. You're like, I just did that 25 minutes ago.
Right. So as planners, we need to make sure that we are understanding the types of conversations that each of our speakers will have from the stage, from their workshop, or however the entire event is designed, so that we are having a diverse methods, right? Diverse methods. Right. There's sometimes you do need the slides on the wall, and it just depends on what you're trying to get across. Is that fair?
Oh, it's very fair. And it's important to ask diversity of what, right? So sometimes, so now we're getting into some people like to make sure that there are no more manels. That's a thing. panels with just men on them,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So it's a meme. It's a thing. And it's actually on me also as a speaker when I get invited to an event to check out if it's diverse or not, because I'm a white man. I don't know if you noticed this, but it's kind of how I present. And it's on me to not to use whatever power and influence I have to make sure that the events that I'm involved in have diverse speakers. So there's diversity of the people, right? But then there's diversity of the modes.
Right.
And
they're both very important.
They're both very important. Diversity of size. There's a classic model called VARC, visual, auditory, reading, written, and kinesthetic, where people talk about like their learning styles. It's been generally debunked that people can be diagnosed and delivered like one type of content, but this is why we should have some music. We should have aromas. We should have slow and fast. We should have big and small. There needs to be balance and variety if you want to create a deeply, deeply engaging and truly electrifying experience. That's the easy way to do it, is to make sure that there's a lot of not just diversity, but cadence between the types of diversity.
Well, just to brag a little bit on this event that we're having right now, we do have a room that has yoga and dancing and screenwriting and then resume reviews. So we tried really hard when we were designing this event to make sure that there was a little bit of something for everyone. And there might be some speakers that use slides, not very many.
And that's okay.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. But we were trying to give a wide variety of experiences throughout the course of this day. So if you're watching this, go find something fun to do that maybe you don't normally get to do at an event.
But mostly that doesn't come for free, right?
It does not.
You have to work to do that, right?
You have to intentionally plan to do that.
Yeah, 100%.
It was very intentional. So, all right. What else? We only have a couple minutes left, I think. What else?
Yeah, is there anything we haven't talked about that was on? I thought you had some great questions on your list. Did we?
I think we got there. Them all? You know what we didn't address is what about people that should be part of the conversation but aren't able to be there?
Yeah. I mean, people for me represents not just the people in the dialogue, but the people on the outside of the dialogue. I don't know for events how relevant it is, certainly for in the design and innovation world, and in developing an event, it is a design process. So the question is, how do we bring the voices of people who are not in the room or at the table to the table and in the room? And I think it's important to at least ask who is responsible, who is part of the conversation in the design of the dialogue, right? And so this goes to the question of like your boss saying, Melissa, design this event this way. You can say like, okay, cool, I'll go do it, which is just a very classic way of, okay, I'm an expert, I'll go do it, versus who can I gather into the conversation and how can I do that? Can I do that in a way where I go and talk to all those people and then tell my boss about those people? Or do I need to bring my boss and say, boss, like, look at all these people? I think our own direct experience is the most illustrative, but I think we always have to be telling stories of people's experiences. And so that's where when your boss says, wait, why do we have to do X, Y, and Z? You say, well, the reason I believe we have to do X, Y, and Z is because of my understanding of needs A, B, and C of customers LMNOP, right? And so that's having a conversation about the people who are in the sphere of the event. They can't be in the conversation. Your boss won't go to all of those discovery calls, but it's still your job to bring those people into the conversation.
Make sure they're represented.
The way I think about it is if you go into an Indian deli in New York City, they have a little shrine to their god someplace in their shop that they worship. And I think in our design efforts, we have to do the exact same thing, have that shrine to the customer, to the person who's going through this experience, who we are designing for. So we can say, we can't do that. Sally, it would break her heart to not have that. We can't do that. Bob has this particular type of disorder, and we can't do that, right? So virtual backgrounds, some people think they're fun. One woman, a senior leader who I coach, it makes her physically nauseous. When she comes to an event of mine, I say, everyone, turn off your backgrounds, right? It makes one person in this room feel unsafe. I didn't know that was a thing, right? And so when we talk about like knowing who we're designing for, we have to know what the abilities, the range of abilities of people that we're designing for, and make sure like we're designing for all of the people that we want this event to benefit. And so if somebody has a learning disability or a physical challenge or a preference, and we want them to feel included, then it's our job to advocate for those people, even though they're not in the room. And when somebody says, but it'll be so much easier if we just do it this other way, you have to say, I'm really sorry. I know that it's going to be easier, and it might even be cheaper, but we're going to fail these two particular customers. And if we want them to be part of this thing, and we want them to feel great about it, then we can't. We have to. I'm going to hold the line on this, as if they were in the room.
Got it. That's pretty powerful, because I'm not sure bosses always understand that. So
no, and it's our job to explain it to them.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So that's a good place to end, actually, I think, because really it's all about the customer at the end of the day, right? And who are we serving?
Yes.
So, parting words? Anything? What's the one thing you want people to know?
Conversations matter, right? Designed for them, care for them. They need us. Like, I think sometimes this work looks invisible. If you do it well, nobody really notices, right? They just have a great experience. But I think it's important work. And I'm grateful that the people who are watching this are making that effort to do that work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Hey everyone, thank you for chatting along and for joining the session. Remember that if you need more info, you can go to theconversationfactory.com, learn more about Daniel. So yeah, thanks for being here. Head on over to Central Perk if you want to hang out and chat with other folks. I'm going to put up the next slide and get ready for a conversation about driving sales with a virtual event. Very exciting. So hang out. We'll see you soon.